Before I tell you what really happened, do this first. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, drop a comment like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear the truth about how easily even the most loyal heart can slip into forbidden territory. I know what you're thinking. Why would a married woman ever let this happen? But let me ask you something even deeper. Have you ever done something you weren't proud of, not out of lust, but out of silence? Out of emotional starvation? I didn't go looking for betrayal. I wasn't chasing danger. I was just trying to be the kind of wife every man hopes to have by his side. That's what makes this story so disturbing. Because I wasn't the cheating wife people gossip about. I was the loyal one. The one who showed up, smiled, supported, until someone else looked at me like I was visible again. And the worst part? That someone wasn't my husband. It was his powerful, magnetic, black boss. The man whose approval could change our lives forever. That's where it all began. What happened next, it wasn't physical. Not at first.
It was deeper than that.
It was the kind of betrayal that starts inside your chest and slowly unravels your soul. The kind you can't talk about because you don't even know how to name it. But today, I'm telling the truth. The forbidden confession. The hidden truth. The real story of infidelity most people would never dare to admit. And by the end, you'll see, this isn't just my story. It might be yours too. I was never the kind of woman who felt comfortable at corporate events. But there I was that night, standing in a room full of polished suits, well-rehearsed laughs, and eyes that scanned you like a resume. My husband, Daniel, was chasing a life-changing promotion. This was a big deal. And apparently, in this world, bringing your spouse along was part of the unspoken interview. It felt like every woman there was being silently judged, including me. Daniel introduced me with that proud sparkle in his eyes I used to adore. He was buzzing with excitement, hoping to impress Richard Coleman, his boss, a man with the kind of power that made others stand straighter around him. Everyone said he was sharp, commanding, a perfectionist. I kept my chin high, my smile polite, and my distance calculated. But deep inside, something in me stirred, like a quiet warning I didn't yet understand. As we floated through clinks of champagne and shallow conversations, I noticed glances here and there. But one gaze didn't flinch. Richard's. It wasn't just friendly or polite, it lingered. It searched. It landed on me with a weight I couldn't ignore. At first, I brushed it off as imagination, but when you've read infidelity stories or heard about emotional cheating, you know when something doesn't feel right. That kind of energy doesn't lie. What was supposed to be a harmless company banquet started to feel like the first chapter of an infidelity story I didn't sign up for. I felt the edge of something, like a slow unraveling.
A shift.
The kind that leads to forbidden confessions, hidden truths, or worse, a breach of trust. In that moment, I couldn't have guessed that a simple night out would spark an emotional domino effect, one that would blur the lines between loyalty and temptation, between the cheating spouse you fear and the unfaithful wife you never imagined becoming. At first, I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe Richard just had one of those naturally intense stares some people do, right? But the way his eyes followed me across the room, it wasn't casual. It was calculated, measured. Every time I looked up, there he was, watching, studying, making it obvious that I hadn't gone unnoticed. And with each glance, I felt something shift inside me, something I didn't want to name. I kept reminding myself, I'm Daniel's wife. I'm not here to be noticed. I'm here to support. But Richard made that impossible. His energy pulled me in like a slow-burning magnet. And the worst part? I didn't hate it. That realization hit me like a gut punch. It was the kind of inner conflict that appears in every story of infidelity, the kind where attraction isn't a choice, it's a creeping force, a quiet betrayal of your own values. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. The way he looked at me, I felt seen. Not as Daniel's wife, but as a woman. And it had been a long time since anyone looked at me like that, like I wasn't invisible. That's how emotional cheating begins, isn't it? With a single moment that validates something inside you didn't even know was starving. This is how forbidden testimony starts, how shocking revelations are born. In glances, not in actions. I found myself growing aware of every step he took, every shift in his presence. It was no longer just a corporate dinner. It was an arena of unspoken tension. And in that space, I could feel the spark of something dangerous. Something that people usually only confess in cheating wife confessions or infidelity story Reddit threads. I should have looked away. I should have walked away. But instead, I waited for the next time his eyes would find mine. He didn't wait long before approaching me again. This time, it was deliberate, like a chess piece finally making its bold move. I stood near the bar, pretending to focus on the bubbles in my glass, when I felt his presence beside me. "Olivia," he said, and somehow my name sounded different in his voice, deeper, slower. There was something in his tone that made the air between us thicken. He wasn't just being polite. He was peeling back a layer. His compliments weren't obvious, but they cut deep. "Daniel's lucky," he said, eyes locked onto mine. "But I'm guessing he doesn't say that nearly enough." I laughed awkwardly, trying to dismiss it, but he didn't back down. The scent of his cologne lingered, and even that betrayed me, reminding me of things I shouldn't be thinking. This wasn't just flirtation anymore. It was the slow seduction of a cheating spouse narrative playing out in real time. I told myself it was innocent, that I hadn't done anything wrong. But truthfully, my heart was racing in a way I hadn't felt in years. His nearness made me forget how to breathe. Every time our eyes met, I felt like I was teetering on the edge of something reckless. It's funny how infidelity and betrayal don't always begin in bedsheets. They begin in moments like this. In glances. In breathless seconds of what should never be, but already feels like too much. He didn't touch me, not yet. But his words did. They touched everything I thought I had under control. And in those brief exchanges, I started to realize just how fragile loyalty can be when emotional hunger goes unnoticed for too long. This kind of pull doesn't just lead to love cheating. It paves the way for marital disloyalty, for that subtle but fatal act of infidelity that starts long before anything physical happens. And still, the night wasn't over yet. I stepped out onto the terrace just to breathe. I told myself I needed air, but deep down, I was hoping he'd follow. And he did. The city lights stretched below us, silent witnesses to a moment that should never have existed. He stood beside me, not saying a word at first, just close enough that I could feel the heat of him. I tried not to tremble, but the tension between us crackled. Undeniable, electric, wrong. He finally spoke. "You don't belong in that room," he said softly, eyes fixed on the skyline. "You belong somewhere you're seen for who you really are." And I hated how those words found the exact part of me I kept hidden, even from Daniel. I should have pushed back. I should have walked away. But instead, I looked at him. And for a second, I let the silence say everything I couldn't. This was no longer harmless. This was the edge of an emotional cliff. He reached out, just barely, his fingers hovering near my cheek, as if touching me would be too much, but not touching me would break him. And for that suspended breath, I didn't move. The air was thick with forbidden confessions, the kind of tension only found in real stories of infidelity. Not the dramatic kind, but the soft betrayals, the ones you feel in your gut long before lips ever meet. This was more dangerous than any affair. This was emotional intimacy, unspoken but undeniable. Before either of us could cross the line, we heard laughter spill onto the terrace behind us. Just like that, we snapped back. He stepped away. I smoothed my dress and pasted on a smile. But something had shifted. We didn't touch. And yet, something between us had already been broken. That's how it starts, doesn't it? Not with an affair, but with a breach of trust so subtle it hides in your own heartbeat. And yet, the hardest part came afterward. Back at Daniel's side, everything looked normal on the outside. I smiled at guests, clinked my glass, nodded at small talk. But inside, I was spiraling. I could still feel the echo of Richard's words, the warmth of that almost touch. It haunted me in a way that physical betrayal never could. That's the thing about emotional cheating. It clings to you. It rewrites your thoughts. And once you've felt it, you can't unfeel it. Daniel leaned in and whispered something sweet, something husbandly, and I smiled on cue. But it felt like I was playing a role, like the wife costume didn't quite fit anymore. I wasn't just a woman at a company dinner. I was a separated woman in her own mind, emotionally split between who I was and who I almost became. I hadn't kissed anyone, but somehow, I felt like a cheating wife, and the guilt that came with that was unbearable. The ride home was quiet. Daniel was tired, rambling about presentations and projections, completely unaware of the storm inside me. I sat there nodding, but I wasn't present. I was replaying everything, every glance, every word, every inch between us that almost disappeared. It's crazy how you can return from a night like that and feel like a divorced woman after cheating, even if your marriage is technically intact. The betrayal wasn't visible, but it was real. Even days later, I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept asking myself, why did I feel so drawn to him? What was missing in me, or in us, that made his attention feel like oxygen? I couldn't stop thinking about it. And that's the danger, isn't it? The betrayal that lives in your mind long after the night ends. That quiet, lingering pull that turns into a testimony of infidelity you carry alone. The kind that whispers, what happens if you see him again? So now I ask you, how many times have you silenced your own emotional needs just to keep a relationship looking perfect on the outside? How many moments have you swallowed whole, pretending you were fine, while something inside you is slowly falling apart? Infidelity doesn't always show up wearing red lipstick and tangled bedsheets. Sometimes it walks in wearing silence, wearing a smile, wearing you. You don't have to cross a physical line to betray someone. And sometimes the breach of trust begins the moment you stop being honest with yourself. Are you in love, or just loyal to a version of your marriage that no longer exists? Because emotional cheating is real, and it's silent, and it's powerful. I lived it, and I know how it can destroy you from the inside out. So, here's the truth no one tells you. Healing starts the moment you stop pretending. The moment you take off the mask and say, "This happened, and I need to understand why." That's when you stop being a prisoner of your own story and start becoming the author of your next chapter. But it only happens if you're willing to go deep, to feel the discomfort, and to stop running from the mirror. Leave a comment. Tell me if this story touched something in you. Have you ever experienced emotional infidelity? Do you think it's worse than physical betrayal? Let's talk about it. And don't forget, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, like this video, and share it with someone who needs this message. We're building a space here for truth, for healing, for stories no one else dares to tell.